The Helios diplomatic station had been designed to impress, and it succeeded spectacularly. The massive structure orbited in neutral space between human and Xanthrii territories, its architecture a deliberate fusion of both species' aesthetic preferences. Clean human functionality married to the elegant organic curves favored by Xanthrii designers. It was beautiful, expensive, and currently filled with enough diplomatic tension to make everyone aboard profoundly uncomfortable. David Mercer was trying very hard not to think about the tension. He had a job to do, maintaining the station's energy systems, and political complications were well above his pay grade. The Xanthrii delegation had arrived 3 days ago, and since then, the entire station had been walking on eggshells. Not because the Xanthrii were hostile. They were unfailingly polite, their diplomatic protocols precise to the point of being intimidating. But there was something about them that made humans nervous, some combination of their obvious technological superiority and their complete lack of anything resembling casual behavior. David had seen exactly one member of the Xanthrii delegation up close, Ambassador Lyrath Kesvarin, who'd been touring the station's critical systems as part of security protocols. She was striking in the way dangerous things are striking, beautiful, elegant, and completely untouchable. Like everyone else, David had heard stories about her. The Xanthrii diplomat who never smiled, never joked, never conceded ground in negotiations she didn't absolutely have to give up. She'd been representing her empire for decades, and she had a reputation for cold precision that made even seasoned human diplomats uncomfortable. David's current assignment was routine maintenance on power distribution nodes in a corridor near the main conference rooms. His team was with him, 3 other engineers he'd worked with for months. They were efficient enough that the work left room for conversation, and conversation among humans on edge inevitably turned into nervous humor. "I'm telling you," Kai, one of the junior engineers, was saying, "the Xanthrii are like allergic to jokes. Have you noticed? Everything is formal statements and precise language." I tried to make small talk with one of their junior diplomats yesterday, and she looked at me like I'd committed a crime. "That's just their culture," Maya replied, checking a diagnostic panel. "From what I've read, they value efficiency and clarity. Our casual communication style probably seems sloppy to them." "Sloppy or not, it's exhausting," Kai complained, "especially with Ambassador Lyrath. Have you guys seen her up close? She's terrifying. Those eyes, they change color based on her emotional state, right? Except hers are always that icy silver, like she doesn't have emotional states, just diplomatic calculation." David had seen Ambassador Lyrath's eyes. Kai was right. They were silver, luminescent, and completely unreadable. He'd also noticed they weren't always silver. He'd caught flashes of other colors when she thought no one was watching, brief moments where something genuine flickered through before being controlled and suppressed. But mentioning that would derail the conversation into speculation he didn't particularly want to engage with. "You know what's weird?" Maya said. "Apparently, Ambassador Lyrath could probably negotiate someone into marrying her through sheer diplomatic pressure. Like she'd present it as a logical alliance, outline all the benefits, systematically address every objection, and next thing you know, you're agreeing to a wedding you didn't want." The team laughed at the absurdity of the image. David found himself grinning despite everything. "Honestly, if she proposed to me, I'd probably say yes. Have you seen her? Terrifying, sure, but in that way where you can't look away. Plus, imagine the stories. More laughter." It was exactly the kind of stupid joke people made to diffuse tension, and David thought nothing more of it. He finished his diagnostic, confirmed the power node was functioning properly, and moved on to the next one. What he didn't know, what he had no reason to suspect, was that Ambassador Lyrath had been in an adjacent corridor at that exact moment. She'd been reviewing security protocols on her personal device, taking a rare moment between negotiating sessions to ensure she understood the station's critical systems. and Xanthriai hearing was considerably more acute than human hearing. She'd heard every word David said. 2 hours later, David received an unexpected notification on his work pad. He was being summoned to inspect the main energy core, routine maintenance that had been scheduled for weeks, but the timing request was immediate. The notification was flagged as coming from Xanthriai security protocols, which struck David as odd but not alarming. The Xanthriai were meticulous about safety. Them requesting a maintenance check before critical negotiations continued was exactly the kind of thorough caution he'd expect. He made his way to the energy core facility, a secure section of the station that required biometric clearance, and passed through multiple redundant safety protocols. The core itself was beautiful in an industrial way, a massive spherical containment vessel surrounded by monitoring systems and power distribution networks that fed the entire station. David loved working on it. There was something satisfying about maintaining systems this complex and essential. When he entered the core facility, he was surprised to find Ambassador Lyraith already there. She stood near one of the monitoring stations, studying readouts with the same intense focus she probably brought to treaty negotiations. Her long, pointed ears were adorned with small silver cuffs that marked her rank, and her robes, deep blue with subtle iridescent threading, moved with liquid grace as she turned to face him. Her luminescent eyes fixed on him, and David felt his breath catch. They were still silver, but deeper than he'd seen before, with hints of other colors shifting beneath the surface like oil on water. "Engineer Mercer," she said, her voice carrying easily over the ambient hum of the energy core. "Thank you for responding promptly." David tried to remember if he'd ever been formally introduced to her. He didn't think so, which meant she'd learned his name somehow, probably from station personnel records. That was both flattering and slightly alarming. "Of course, Ambassador," he replied, keeping his tone professional. "The notification said you requested a systems check. Is there a specific concern?" "I wish to review the power system specifications for security purposes," Lyraith said. "Your presence was requested to provide expert assessment." That made sense. David moved to one of the monitoring stations, pulling up diagnostic readouts and checking various parameters. Everything was functioning perfectly. Power output stable, containment fields nominal, distribution networks showing green across all indicators. "All systems are operating within expected parameters," he reported. "Is there something specific you'd like me to examine?" "No." Lyraith's response was quiet, and when David looked up, he found she'd moved closer. Considerably closer. Close enough that he could see the fine details of her features. The way her skin had a faint iridescent quality, the subtle mobility of her long ears, the complex shifts of color in her eyes. "Engineer Mercer," she said, and her voice had dropped to just above a whisper, intimate in a way that made David's heart rate spike with sudden nervousness. "I heard your statement earlier about what you would say if I proposed to you." David's mind went completely blank. Oh God, oh no, she'd heard his stupid joke. The thing he'd said to make his nervous teammates laugh, the throwaway comment about saying yes if Ambassador Lyraith proposed, she'd heard it. Heat flooded his face as mortification set in. "Ambassador, I'm so sorry," he started, words tumbling over themselves. "That was completely inappropriate. I was just joking with my team, trying to lighten the mood. I didn't mean any disrespect to you or your culture." Lyraith raised one elegant hand, and David found himself falling silent. There was something commanding about the gesture that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to some instinct that said pay attention. "I understand it was humor," she said. "A joke meant to deflect tension, to make an uncomfortable situation more bearable. Very human. But the words you chose, Engineer Mercer, they align with something significant in my culture." She took another step closer, and David became acutely aware that they were alone in this facility, that the door had closed behind him, that no one else was around to witness whatever was happening right now. "Among my people," Lyraith continued, A proposal is not romantic in the way humans conceive it. It is not about affection or desire. It is a pact of trust, an alliance between individuals deemed capable of shaping the future of our civilization. It is sacred, binding, and extended only when one recognizes in another the qualities necessary to face challenges our logic alone cannot predict. Her luminescent eyes shifted colors, silver bleeding into deep purple that David had never seen a Xanthrii display. You possess something my people have lost, something we bred out of ourselves in our pursuit of pure rationality. You trust intuition that operates beyond calculation. You solve problems by embracing chaos rather than avoiding it. You make decisions with incomplete information and somehow arrive at correct conclusions. David's mouth had gone dry. He tried to process what she was saying, but it felt like she was speaking a language he didn't quite understand. I'm just an engineer ambassador. I fix power systems. You solve complex problems through pattern recognition that defies our analytical models, Lyraith corrected. I have reviewed your work record. 3 months ago, you identified a cascade failure risk in the station's backup generators that our safety systems did not predict. You could not explain your reasoning through computation, but your instinct proved correct. Similar incidents throughout your career, problems solved through what you call gut feeling, that our people would dismiss as irrational. She leaned closer, and David caught a scent like ozone mixed with something floral he couldn't identify. My empire faces a crisis, Engineer Mercer, a threat that our technology and logic cannot predict or prevent. We have tried every analytical approach. We have consulted our finest minds. We continue to miss something fundamental because we approach every problem through pure calculation. Her voice dropped even lower, intimate and intense. We need what you have, what humans have. The ability to recognize patterns that logic alone cannot see, to trust intuition alongside analysis. We need someone who embraces uncertainty rather than being paralyzed by it. David's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the energy core's hum. What are you asking me? I heard you say that if I proposed, you would say yes, Lyraith said, and her eyes held his with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. So I am asking, Engineer David Mercer, form this alliance with me. Become my partner in addressing the crisis my people face. Bring your human intuition to complement our Xanthrii logic. Help me save my empire from a future we cannot predict. She lifted one hand, holding it between them, palm up in what David's limited knowledge of Xanthrii culture recognized as a gesture of offering. Then say it, she whispered. Say yes, form this alliance. Honor the words you spoke in jest and help me turn them into something real. David stared at her outstretched hand, at her luminescent purple eyes, at the controlled desperation he could now see beneath her diplomatic mask. This was insane. This was the Xanthrii ambassador, one of the most powerful diplomats in the galaxy, asking him to form some kind of sacred alliance because she'd overheard him make a stupid joke. Every rational part of his brain was screaming that this was a trap, or a misunderstanding, or something he should absolutely not agree to. But he looked at Lyraith, really looked at her, and saw something that made him hesitate. Beneath all that diplomatic precision and intimidating competence, she was genuinely afraid. Afraid for her people, afraid that their crisis would destroy them, afraid that asking a random human engineer for help was a sign of how desperate things had become. She'd heard him solve a problem intuitively and recognized it as something her people couldn't do. And rather than dismiss it as inferior to their logical approaches, she'd understood it as complementary, as necessary, as worth forming a sacred alliance to access. David didn't know if he could actually help with whatever crisis she was describing. He didn't know if his supposed intuition was anything more than educated guesses and pattern recognition built from years of experience. He definitely didn't know if he was worthy of whatever sacred ritual she was proposing. But he knew that Ambassador Lyraith, the cold, precise, untouchable diplomat, had just made herself vulnerable in front of him, had asked for help despite every cultural instinct that probably told her to solve problems through Xanthrii logic, rather than admitting she needed something from another species. And he knew that if there was even a chance he could actually help prevent whatever crisis threatened her empire, walking away would be cowardice. He was probably going to regret this. This was almost certainly going to complicate his life in ways he couldn't currently imagine. But looking at Lywraith's outstretched hand, at the hope barely visible beneath her controlled expression, David found himself reaching out. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with nerves and something that might have been the beginning of commitment. "I'll say yes. I'll form this alliance with you." Lywraith's eyes flashed from purple to brilliant gold, and for the first time since he'd met her, Ambassador Lywraith smiled. It was small, controlled, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but it had been genuine. "Then the alliance is offered and accepted," she said formally. "David Mercer, you are now my partner in this endeavor. Our peoples are bound through us." And as David's hand met hers, feeling warmth and the strange texture of Xanthrii skin against his palm, he realized his entire life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to predict. All because he'd made a joke to ease tension, and the galaxy's most intimidating diplomat had heard him and decided to take him seriously. The next morning, David woke up in his quarters still wearing yesterday's clothes, his hand clutching a small crystalline device that pulsed with faint light. For a disorienting moment, he thought the entire encounter with Ambassador Lywraith had been a stress-induced fever dream. Then the binding token pulsed warmth against his palm, and reality crashed back with uncomfortable clarity. He'd formed an alliance with the Xanthrii ambassador, a sacred alliance, based on her overhearing his stupid joke and deciding he possessed some kind of useful intuition. And now he was apparently her partner in addressing a civilization-threatening crisis he still didn't fully understand. David sat up, holding the token in the early morning light. It was beautiful in an alien way, crystalline structure wrapped in metal filaments that seemed to shift configuration as he watched, never quite settling into a stable pattern. When he focused on it, he could feel something. Not quite communication, but awareness. A sense that Lywraith was elsewhere on the station, that she was awake and thinking about their alliance. It was disconcerting and fascinating in equal measure. His work pad chimed with messages that had accumulated overnight. The first was from his supervisor, requesting an immediate meeting. The next three were from his teammates, ranging from concerned to confused. And there was a formal notification from the human diplomatic delegation, summoning him to Ambassador Chen's office at 900 hours. David checked the chronometer. He had 45 minutes to shower, change, and try to figure out how to explain what he'd done to people who would almost certainly think he'd lost his mind. The meeting with Ambassador Chen was exactly as uncomfortable as David had feared. Chen was a career diplomat, brilliant and pragmatic, and she did not appreciate surprises. She especially didn't appreciate junior engineers creating diplomatic incidents without authorization or consultation. "Explain," she said the moment David entered her office, not bothering with pleasantries. "Explain how you ended up in a formal alliance with Ambassador Lywraith. And before you start, understand that I've already received 3 communications from the Xanthrii delegation referencing your partnership, and how it demonstrates human Xanthrii cooperation that should inform our current negotiations." David took a breath and tried to organize his thoughts. It was an accident, kind of. I made a joke that she overheard, and in Xanthrii culture, what I said apparently aligned with their proposal ritual. She approached me because she believes I have problem-solving skills her people need for a crisis they're facing. I agreed to help. Chen's expression suggested this explanation was completely inadequate. You agreed to help by forming one of the most sacred bonds in Xanthrii culture. Do you have any idea what you've done? The political implications alone. I understand it's complicated, David interrupted, probably overstepping but needing to defend his decision. But Ambassador Lyrath wasn't trying to manipulate me or create diplomatic leverage. She genuinely believes I can help with a technical problem her people can't solve through their usual approaches. It's about complementary problem solving, not politics. Everything is politics, Chen snapped, especially when it involves formal alliances between species. The Xanthrii are already using this in negotiations. They're arguing that your alliance demonstrates deeper cooperation than we've previously acknowledged, that it should influence treaty terms. And I have no framework for understanding whether they're exploiting you or if you're somehow complicit. David felt frustration rising. I'm not complicit in anything. I'm an engineer who agreed to help solve a technical problem. That's all this is. No, Chen said firmly. It's not. The moment you accepted a formal Xanthrii alliance, you became a political figure whether you intended to or not. Your actions now reflect on all of humanity's relationship with the Xanthrii Empire. You don't get to pretend this is just technical consultation. She sat back, her expression shifting from anger to calculation. The situation is what it is. We need to manage it. You'll continue your role as Lyrath's alliance partner. We don't have a choice about that without creating an even worse diplomatic incident. But you report everything to me. Every conversation, every request, every development. I need to understand what the Xanthrii actually want from this arrangement. David wanted to protest that he wasn't a spy, that his partnership with Lyrath was supposed to be about genuine collaboration, not intelligence gathering. But he also understood Chen's position. From her perspective, he was a junior engineer who'd stumbled into something with major diplomatic implications. She needed to maintain some control over a situation that had developed outside normal channels. I'll keep you informed, he agreed carefully. But I need you to understand, I'm not going to betray Lyrath's trust. She came to me because she needs help and I gave my word I'd provide it. I won't compromise that. Chen studied him for a long moment. Your loyalty is admirable but potentially problematic. Remember that you're human first, partner to an alien diplomat second. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment about where your true loyalties lie. David left the meeting feeling unsettled. He understood Chen's concerns, but her framing bothered him. The idea that helping Lyrath address her empire's crisis was somehow betraying humanity felt wrong. Shouldn't humans want to help other species solve problems? Wasn't that the foundation of productive diplomatic relations? His work pad chimed with another message. This one was from Lyrath. Meeting with Xanthrii delegation at 1100 hours. Your presence requested. We'll brief you on crisis details and introduce you to our technical advisors. Please come prepared to ask questions. Your intuitive approach requires you understand the problem fully, even if our data seems complete. David felt some tension ease. At least Lyrath understood he'd need context and information, not just orders to follow. He spent the next hour reviewing everything he could access about Xanthrii infrastructure and technology, trying to build a foundation for understanding whatever crisis they were facing. The Xanthrii technical section was unlike anything David had experienced in human facilities. Where human engineers favored function over form, the Xanthrii had created a space that was simultaneously a laboratory, a data center, and what could only be described as a temple to systematic analysis. Holographic displays floated throughout the room, showing streams of data in Xanthrii script that David's translator implant struggled to process. At least a dozen Xanthrii scientists and engineers worked at various stations, their luminescent eyes shifting through colors as they analyzed whatever problems they were currently addressing. Lyrath stood at the center of it all, and the moment David entered, she looked up. Her eyes flashed gold briefly before returning to their usual silver, and David wondered if that meant she was pleased to see him, or if gold meant something else entirely in Xanthrii emotional expression. Engineer Mercer, she greeted him formally, gesturing for him to join her at a central display. "Thank you for coming. I want to introduce you to the situation we face and to the colleagues you'll be working with." What followed was the most intense technical briefing David had ever experienced. Lyrae and her team walked him through the crisis in exhaustive detail. The Xanthrii Empire's infrastructure was experiencing what they called cascade precursors, micro-failures in systems that should be perfectly reliable, occurring in patterns that suggested building towards something catastrophic. The failures were small individually: a communication relay dropping connection for milliseconds, a power distribution node fluctuating outside tolerances, a navigation beacon providing incorrect data. Each incident was minor, easily corrected, and appeared random. But Xanthrii analysis suggested they weren't random at all. There were patterns in the timing, the location, the types of systems affected. Patterns that their modeling indicated were precursors to catastrophic cascade failure, the kind where small problems amplify through system interconnections until everything collapses simultaneously. They'd been analyzing these failures for 8 months. They'd checked for sabotage, for equipment degradation, for programming errors, for quantum instabilities in their communication networks. They'd run millions of simulations, tested countless hypotheses, involved their finest analytical minds. And they still couldn't predict where or when the next failures would occur, or determine what was causing them. One of the Xanthrii scientists, a woman named Thessie whose eyes kept shifting between blue and purple as she spoke, explained their frustration. "We have complete data, perfect monitoring. Our systems are designed with redundancy that should prevent cascade effects. Yet the failures continue, accelerating in frequency. Our models cannot explain it. We are missing something fundamental." David listened, absorbing information and trying to understand not just what they were telling him, but what they weren't saying. Finally, he asked the question that felt obvious from a human engineering perspective. "Have you considered emergent behaviors, interactions between systems that weren't anticipated in the design?" The Xanthrii scientists looked at him, with expressions ranging from confusion to something that might have been condescension. Thessie answered patiently, as if explaining something to a child. "Our systems are designed with complete interaction mapping. Every possible connection between components is analyzed and accounted for during construction. We do not have unanticipated interactions." "But systems evolve," David pressed. "Software updates, hardware replacements, changing usage patterns. They create new interaction possibilities that weren't part of the original design. Have you checked for behaviors that emerged after installation rather than being designed in?" The silence that followed felt heavy. Finally, another scientist, an older man whose robes marked him as senior, spoke up. "We analyze systems based on their design specifications. Your suggestion requires examining behaviors that should not exist. It is inefficient." David bit back frustration. They were brilliant, clearly, but their approach was so rigidly logical that they couldn't see beyond their own frameworks. How could he help them find a solution if they dismissed any suggestion that didn't fit their analytical models? It was Lyrae who intervened. She'd been observing the exchange, and now she stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Engineer Mercer approaches this as a human would, looking for what feels wrong rather than what calculates as impossible. That is precisely why I brought him here. We need perspective that challenges our assumptions, even when those challenges seem illogical." She turned to face David directly. "You are struggling to communicate your intuition in ways we can process. That is expected. If your approach could be reduced to pure logic, we would not need it. What do you need from us to apply your problem-solving methods?" David thought about that. "I need to understand the patterns you're seeing, but I need to visualize them differently. Not as discrete events, but as flows, connections over time and space. Your data is probably perfect, but the way you're analyzing it might be hiding patterns a human brain would naturally recognize." Over the next several hours, David worked with the Xanthri team to reformat their data in ways that felt intuitive to him, rather than logically optimal for them. They were patient, though clearly skeptical, treating his requests like humoring an irrational child who might occasionally stumble onto something useful by accident. But as David started seeing the failure data presented in formats his brain could process naturally, something did start to feel wrong. He couldn't articulate it yet, couldn't point to specific evidence. But there was a pattern there, something about how the failures clustered in ways that the Xanthri's spatial analysis hadn't captured. Can you show me where these failures occur relative to your faster-than-light transit network? He asked. Not just the three-dimensional locations, but how they relate to hyperspace transition points. The Xanthri scientists exchanged glances that suggested this was an odd request, but they generated the visualization David had asked for. And there, finally, he saw something. The failures didn't cluster in normal three-dimensional space, but when plotted in relation to FTL transition points, there was a pattern. Failures were happening near where hyperspace transit paths intersected in specific configurations. There, David said, pointing at the holographic display. That's not random. There's correlation between failure rates and FTL path intersections. Thessie studied the visualization, her eyes shifting through rapid color changes. The correlation is statistically significant, she admitted slowly. But FTL transit paths don't interact. They're independent dimensional mappings. Except they do interact, David argued. Not in ways your design anticipated, but in ways that might be emerging from how your entire network has evolved. You're not analyzing individual transit points. You need to look at the system as a whole, see if there are resonance effects between multiple overlapping FTL fields. For the first time he'd entered the facility, the Xanthri scientists looked genuinely interested rather than skeptical. Lyreth's eyes had shifted to brilliant gold, and when she met David's gaze, there was something in her expression that might have been vindication. Explore his hypothesis, she ordered her team. Model resonance effects between FTL transit paths, focusing on intersection points that match the failure pattern engineer Mercer has identified. As the Xanthri scientists dove into analysis with newfound energy, Lyreth pulled David aside. You saw something we could not, she said quietly, just as I believed you would. Our analytical models are powerful, but they examine components individually. Your intuition recognized the pattern that emerges from system-level interactions. David felt embarrassed by the praise. I just asked obvious questions. Any human engineer would have suggested the same things. No, Lyreth corrected. Any human engineer might have asked those questions. You asked them while understanding enough of our technology to ask them meaningfully, while trusting your instinct enough to push past our skepticism, while recognizing patterns in visualization that our purely logical analysis could not see. She paused, and her next words were more personal than anything she'd said in front of her team. I was right to form this alliance with you. Whatever comes of this politically, however complicated our partnership becomes, this moment, you seeing what we could not, this validates the choice I made. And standing in that alien technical facility, surrounded by brilliant scientists who'd finally found a promising lead because a human engineer had trusted his gut, David thought maybe the alliance wasn't such a terrible accident after all. Maybe sometimes the most important capabilities were the ones that couldn't be quantified or predicted, the intuitive leaps that complemented pure logic. Maybe that was exactly what Lyreth had recognized when she heard his joke and decided to take him seriously. The crisis wasn't solved yet. The political complications hadn't gone away. But for the first time since walking into that energy core facility and hearing Lyreth whisper, "Then say it," David felt like maybe he could actually help. And that made all the complications that would inevitably follow feel worth navigating. The breakthrough came 3 days later, after David had spent nearly every waking hour immersed in Xanthrii technical data and analysis. The resonance hypothesis he'd suggested had proven correct. The Xanthrii Empire's faster-than-light transit network was experiencing interference patterns where multiple hyperspace paths intersected. Their individual system analysis had missed it because they'd been looking at each transit point in isolation, rather than modeling the network as an interconnected whole. But while identifying the problem was satisfying, the political fallout was just beginning. The moment word spread that a human engineer had identified a critical flaw their own analysts had missed, the reactions were immediate and polarized. The human delegation saw it as vindication. Ambassador Chen sent David a terse message, acknowledging that his alliance with Lyrath had produced unexpected benefits, and suggesting they discuss how to leverage this success in ongoing treaty negotiations. David deleted the message without responding, uncomfortable with the idea of using genuine technical collaboration as political leverage. The Xanthrii reaction was more complicated. A faction of their delegation, led by an elder named Kethrin, whose formal robes marked him as a cultural advisor, viewed David's success as embarrassing proof that Xanthrii analytical superiority wasn't as absolute as they'd believed. Worse, from their perspective, was that this revelation had come through a sacred alliance with a human who couldn't possibly understand the full cultural significance of what he'd entered into. David learned about this opposition during a formal session of the Xanthrii delegation that he was required to attend as Lyrath's alliance partner. The session took place in a chamber designed in pure Xanthrii style, organic architecture that seemed to grow from the floor, bioluminescent panels providing light that shifted in response to the emotional states of those present. Seating arranged in concentric circles that reflected their complex social hierarchies. Lyrath sat in the innermost circle, her position marking her as the delegation's leader. David had been placed beside her, which apparently signified his status as her formal partner. He was acutely aware that he was the only human in the room, that every Xanthrii eye was on him with varying degrees of approval or hostility. Elder Kethrin spoke first, his luminescent eyes a steady crimson that David had learned indicated strong disapproval. Ambassador Lyrath, this alliance you have formed violates the spirit, if not the letter, of our sacred traditions. The ritual assumes partners who understand our ways, who can navigate the complexities of Xanthrii society. A human cannot do this. Engineer Mercer's technical contribution, while valuable, does not justify binding him through our most important cultural practice. Lyrath's response was measured but firm, her eyes flashing between silver and deep red in a pattern David couldn't fully interpret. The alliance was formed according to our traditions. Engineer Mercer heard the proposal, understood its implications after I explained them, and accepted consciously. His human origin does not invalidate the bond. But can he fulfill the obligations? Kethrin pressed. An alliance partner must understand our cultural context, must represent Xanthrii interests with the same dedication they show their own. How can a human, with no background in our history or values, do this? David felt like he should defend himself but wasn't sure what to say. Before he could formulate a response, Thessi, the scientist he'd worked most closely with, spoke up from one of the outer circles. Elder Kethrin, Engineer Mercer has demonstrated exactly the qualities our alliance ritual is designed to identify. He approaches problems with methods complementary to our own. He trusts his judgment enough to challenge our assumptions. He has already proven his value by seeing what our pure logic could not. Is that not precisely what the alliance is meant to create? Partnership that makes us more capable together than we are separately. Another voice joined in, a younger Xanthrii diplomat whose name David hadn't learned. But the sacred nature of the ritual, extending it to an alien who cannot fully understand its significance, diminishes its meaning for all of us. The debate continued, arguments flowing back and forth in Xanthrii with such speed that David's translator implant struggled to keep up. He caught the general thrust. Some felt his alliance with Lyraith was inappropriate regardless of his technical contributions, while others argued that results proved the validity of the bond. Finally, Lyraith stood and the chamber fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. "I understand your concerns. The alliance with Engineer Mercer is unprecedented, and I do not dismiss the cultural complexities it creates. But I will not dissolve it based on fear and tradition that has calcified into rigidity." She turned to face David directly. "Engineer Mercer has been my partner for less than a week. In that time, he has identified a threat to our empire that 8 months of our finest analysis could not predict. He has done this not through superior technology or greater intelligence, but through a fundamentally different approach to problem solving that complements our own." Her eyes shifted to brilliant gold. "That is exactly what our alliance ritual was designed to create. Not partnerships of similarity, but partnerships of complementary strength. If we dismiss that because the partner is human rather than Xanthrii, we admit that our sacred tradition is merely performance rather than functional wisdom." She looked back at the assembled delegation. "I propose a compromise. We give Engineer Mercer 1 week to demonstrate whether his insights can actually solve our crisis, not merely identify it. If he succeeds, the alliance stands and opposition ceases. If he fails, we can revisit the question of whether the bond should be maintained." Catherine looked displeased but nodded slowly. "1 week. If Engineer Mercer can prove himself worthy of the alliance through action rather than just observation, I will withdraw my objections." The session ended, and David found himself swept into a whirlwind of technical work. The resonance problem was understood now, but solving it required implementing changes across the entire Xanthrii FTL network, recalibrating transit protocols, installing dampening fields at critical intersection points, creating monitoring systems to detect future resonance effects. David worked alongside Xanthrii engineers who ranged from genuinely collaborative to barely civil. Some appreciated his intuitive approach and asked him to review their solutions for problems he might spot through pattern recognition. Others treated him as a temporary annoyance, someone who'd gotten lucky once and would inevitably fail when faced with real complexity. The work was fascinating and exhausting in equal measure. Xanthrii engineering was elegant in ways human technology wasn't. They approached every problem through mathematical optimization that produced solutions that were genuinely beautiful. But their rigid adherence to proven methods meant they sometimes missed creative alternatives that didn't fit established frameworks. David found himself serving as a bridge between Xanthrii precision and human improvisation. When they designed dampening field configurations, he suggested variations that violated their optimization criteria, but that his intuition said would handle edge cases better. When they debated monitoring protocols, he proposed adaptive systems that could respond to unexpected conditions rather than just detecting predicted failures. Not all his suggestions were good. Several times he proposed approaches that the Xanthrii mathematically proved wouldn't work. But enough of his ideas proved valuable that even the skeptical engineers started consulting him before finalizing designs. Lyraith observed much of this work, and David noticed she was learning from their collaboration as much as he was. She began asking questions that challenged her people's assumptions in ways that felt distinctly human. What if we're wrong about this? Have we considered that our model might be incomplete? Could there be factors we're not measuring? One evening, after a particularly intense session where they'd finally solved a critical configuration problem, through combination of Xanthrii mathematical precision and David's intuitive pattern recognition, Lyraith pulled him aside. "You are changing how my people think," she said quietly. "Not just solving problems, but teaching them to question their own frameworks. That is more valuable than any specific technical contribution." David felt embarrassed. I'm just asking obvious questions. Stuff any engineer would think of. No, Lyraith corrected. You are asking questions that feel obvious to a human, but that violate our cultural assumptions about how problem-solving should work. You're teaching us that there are other valid approaches beyond pure logic, that intuition and creativity have value we've been dismissing. She paused, and her eyes shifted to a color David hadn't seen before, soft amber that seemed warm compared to her usual silver. I formed this alliance because I believed you could help us solve our crisis. But what you're actually doing is helping us remember how to think differently. That may be even more important. The week deadline arrived faster than David expected. The Xanthrii delegation assembled again, this time including representatives from their homeworld who'd come specifically to assess whether the alliance with a human engineer should be maintained. David presented the solution they'd developed, technical details about dampening fields and monitoring protocols and recalibrated transit paths. But more importantly, he showed how the solution had emerged from collaboration between Xanthrii analytical precision and human intuitive problem-solving, each approach strengthening the other. The resonance problem was solved. Models showed that implementing their solution would eliminate the cascade precursors, stabilizing the FTL network and preventing the catastrophic failures that had threatened the Empire. Elder Kethrin stood when David finished his presentation. The chamber was silent, waiting for his judgment. "Engineer Mercer," he said formally, "you have proven yourself worthy of the alliance, not merely through technical contribution, though that alone would be significant, but through demonstrating that human and Xanthrii approaches can complement rather than conflict, that our rigid logic benefits from your flexible intuition." He turned to face Lyraith. "Ambassador, I withdraw all objections to your alliance. The bond you formed, however unconventionally initiated, has proven its value. May it continue to serve both our peoples." The relief David felt was profound. The political opposition had been exhausting, the constant need to prove himself wearing in ways he hadn't fully recognized until the pressure eased. As the delegation dispersed, Thessie approached him with her eyes showing pleased purple. "You have done something remarkable, Engineer Mercer. Not just solving our crisis, but showing us that our cultural assumption, that Xanthrii methods are inherently superior, was limiting us. That is a gift worth more than technical solutions." Later, alone with Lyraith in her quarters, David finally allowed himself to acknowledge how terrified he'd been of failing. "I got lucky," he admitted. "Asked the right questions, recognized the right pattern, but there's no guarantee I'll be that lucky next time." Lyraith regarded him with those luminescent eyes, amber again. That warm color he was learning indicated something positive. "It was not luck. It was exactly the complementary strength I recognized in you. You see patterns where we see only data. You trust intuition where we trust only calculation. You embrace uncertainty where we demand certainty." She moved to look out the viewport at the stars. "The alliance we formed was initiated by accident, by me overhearing your joke and recognizing opportunity. But what we have built from that accident is genuine partnership. That is what our ritual is meant to create, not just agreement to collaborate, but actual complementary teamwork that makes both partners more capable." She turned back to face him. "You asked earlier what happens now. The political crisis is resolved. The technical crisis is being solved. But the alliance continues. Will you stay, David Mercer? Continue being my partner in the work of connecting our peoples through genuine collaboration?" David thought about his old life, the comfortable routine, the simple ambitions, the predictable future he'd expected. Then he thought about the past week, exhausting, terrifying, but also the most meaningful work he'd ever done. "Yes," he said, "I'll stay. I'll be your partner. Not because a ritual demands it, but because I think we can actually do something valuable together." Lyraith smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed her usually controlled features. Then we begin the next phase. Not crisis response, but building something lasting. A partnership that shows both our peoples that different approaches strengthen rather than weaken each other. And looking at her smile, at the warmth in her amber eyes, David thought that maybe his stupid joke had led to something far more important than he'd ever imagined. Not just a personal alliance, but a model for how humans and Xanthrii could work together, each bringing complementary strengths, each learning from the other, each becoming more capable through partnership than either could be alone. The joke that had started it all had become something real, and David was discovering that sometimes the best things in life come from accidents you're brave enough to embrace rather than run from. 3 months after the crisis was resolved, David's life had transformed in ways he was still processing. He was no longer a maintenance engineer at a diplomatic station. His official title was now Human Liaison for Intuitive Problem Solving to the Xanthrii Empire, a position that hadn't existed until Lyraith created it specifically for him. He split his time between human and Xanthrii space, consulting on technical challenges that benefited from his particular approach to pattern recognition. The work was fascinating. Xanthrii engineers would present problems they'd analyzed exhaustively but couldn't solve, and David would ask questions that felt obvious to him, but that violated their analytical frameworks in ways that opened new solutions. But more than the professional changes, it was his partnership with Lyraith that had evolved in unexpected ways. They worked together regularly, and what had started as a formal alliance had developed into genuine collaboration built on mutual respect and growing understanding. They'd learned to communicate across the vast gulf between their different cognitive styles. Lyraith's precise logic balanced David's intuitive leaps. His creative chaos softened her rigid structures. When they worked together on complex problems, they achieved solutions neither could have reached alone. Her mathematical optimization refining his pattern recognition insights, his willingness to embrace uncertainty complementing her need for calculated certainty. They'd also become friends, though defining that friendship was complicated by the formal nature of their alliance. They shared meals when schedules aligned, discussing everything from technical problems to philosophical questions about consciousness and culture. Lyraith was different when they were alone, less the intimidating ambassador, more the curious person beneath the diplomatic mask. David discovered she had a dry sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe enough to show it. She'd make observations about human irrationality that were simultaneously perceptive and affectionate, finding genuine fascination in the chaos of human emotional life. She told him about Xanthrii culture with a nuance that public presentations never showed. The pressures of their rigid social hierarchies, the isolation that came from always performing perfect rationality, the ways their pursuit of pure logic had cost them certain kinds of connection. And she trusted him in ways she admitted she trusted few people. "You have no political agenda," she told him once. "You do not calculate how every interaction might benefit you. You simply respond honestly to what you observe. That is rare in my world, precious, even." One evening, sitting in Lyraith's quarters on a Xanthrii diplomatic vessel, David worked on a personal engineering project while she reviewed treaty documents. The silence was comfortable, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with conversation. Finally, David set aside his work and asked something he'd been wondering about for months. "Why me? I understand you heard me solve a problem intuitively and recognized that as potentially useful. But why form the alliance? Why initiate your culture's most sacred partnership ritual instead of just hiring me as a consultant?" Lyraith was quiet for a long moment, her eyes shifting through colors as she considered her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was more personal than he'd ever heard it. "Among my people, we have become so focused on logic and calculation that we've lost something essential: the ability to trust beyond what can be proven, to value intuition alongside analysis, to embrace uncertainty as opportunity rather than threat. She set down her datapad and turned to face him fully. I have spent decades as a diplomat, always performing perfect rationality, never allowing emotion or instinct to influence my decisions. It is what my culture demands, what my position requires, and it has been lonely in ways I did not recognize until I heard you make that joke. David waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. When I heard you tell your teammate that you would say yes if I proposed. When I heard you express interest in forming alliance with me despite knowing me only as the cold, logical ambassador everyone fears. I recognized something I had been seeking without knowing I sought it. Her eyes shifted to that warm amber color. Someone who could see beyond the performance to the person underneath. Someone whose approach to the world could balance my rigid logic. Someone who embrace. I'm glad I said yes, he told her. Even though it was terrifying at the time, even though it completely upended my life. This partnership, working with you, learning from you, helping each other, it's become the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Lyraith's eyes shifted to brilliant gold. The human concept of serendipity, finding valuable things by accident while searching for something else. That applies here. You made a joke to ease tension. I overheard and recognized opportunity. We formed an alliance neither expected, and we discovered partnership that benefits both our peoples and ourselves. She turned to face him directly. There is a Xanthri saying, the best journeys begin with unexpected turns. Our partnership is proof of that wisdom. The next morning brought a formal ceremony where their alliance was officially recognized by both human and Xanthri governments. What had begun as a diplomatic complication had been reframed as a symbol of interspecies cooperation, a demonstration that different approaches could complement rather than conflict. David wore formal diplomatic attire that felt uncomfortable but necessary. He stood beside Lyraith during formal proceedings, fielding questions from dignitaries and reporters with more confidence than he would have believed possible months ago. Ambassador Chen approached afterward, her expression warmer than he'd seen since this all began. You've done something remarkable, Mr. Mercer. Not just solving a technical crisis, but creating a model for human Xanthri collaboration that goes beyond pure treaty negotiations. That has value beyond what any single solution could achieve. Even Elder Kethrin offered formal acknowledgement. You have proven yourself worthy of the sacred alliance, Engineer Mercer. More than that, you have shown that our cultural assumptions about superiority through pure logic were limiting us. That is a gift my people needed. Later, stealing a moment alone between obligations, Lyraith said something that surprised him. You know, I heard the entire conversation that day. Not just your comment about saying yes to my proposal. I heard you tell your teammate that you found me terrifying in a way that makes one unable to look away. David felt his face heat with embarrassment. That was, not my most articulate moment. But it was honest, Lyraith said, and there was warmth in her tone. My people value precision over honesty sometimes. We say what is calculated to achieve desired outcomes rather than what we genuinely feel. Your comment was truthful, unguarded. That was part of what made me approach you. You said what you actually thought, without filtering it through diplomatic calculation. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture David had learned indicated thoughtfulness. For what it is worth, I find you fascinating in ways that defy logical analysis. Your chaotic problem-solving, your emotional transparency, your willingness to embrace uncertainty, they should frustrate me. Instead, they intrigue me. Make me want to understand how you think, how you approach the universe so differently from my people. David realized they were having a conversation that went beyond professional partnership or formal alliance. They were acknowledging something personal that had been growing between them, genuine affection that neither quite knew how to categorize. What happens now? He asked. With us, I mean. The alliance is established, the crisis is resolved, the formal recognition is complete. But we keep working together, keep spending time together. At some point, people are going to start asking what exactly our partnership is. Lyraith considered this carefully. Among my people, alliances like ours can evolve. They begin as formal partnerships but can deepen into something that resembles what humans call companionate marriage, partnership built on respect and affection rather than romance, but no less committed for that difference. She met his eyes directly. I do not know what we are becoming, but I know I value what we have built together more than I expected. I trust you in ways I trust almost no one. I enjoy your company beyond any professional necessity. I find myself considering your perspective even when you are not present, anticipating how you would approach problems I face. Her eyes shifted through colors, amber, gold, hints of soft blue. If that is friendship, then it is the deepest friendship I have known. If it is something else, something my culture does not have precise language for, then we will discover it together. There is no requirement that we define it immediately. David smiled. I'm okay with figuring it out as we go. That seems appropriate for a partnership that started with an accidental joke and a whispered challenge in an energy core. The best journeys begin with unexpected turns, Lyraith repeated softly. Ours certainly has. They stood together at the viewport, looking out at the stars between human and Xanthrii space. Two people from vastly different worlds who'd found unexpected partnership through accident, intuition, and willingness to trust, despite every rational reason for caution. The alliance that began with, "I'd say yes if she proposed," and then say it, had become something neither expected but both valued deeply. Professional collaboration had evolved into genuine friendship. Formal partnership had developed into emotional connection that defied easy categorization, but felt real and significant nonetheless. What it would ultimately become, they didn't yet know, but they would discover it together, one unexpected turn at a time, with equal parts human intuition and Xanthrii careful consideration, emotional truth and logical analysis, creative chaos and structured precision. A partnership that worked precisely because it embraced both their different approaches, making them more capable together than either could be alone. David thought about the joke he'd made to ease tension, never imagining the galaxy's most intimidating diplomat would hear him and take him seriously. About Lyraith whispering, "Then say it," in an energy core, challenging him to honor words he'd spoken in jest. About everything that had followed, crisis and collaboration, political firestorm and genuine friendship, formal alliance evolving into something deeper. Sometimes the most important things in life came from accidents brave enough to embrace, from jokes taken seriously by people perceptive enough to see truth hidden in humor, from unexpected partnerships that challenged everything both parties thought they understood about themselves and each other. The human who'd made a joke and the Xanthrii who'd heard it had become something neither expected, partners in the truest sense. Friends discovering that connection across vast differences was not just possible but transformative. And if that partnership continued evolving into something even deeper, something that merged Xanthrii formal alliance with human emotional connection into a form of relationship unique to them both, well, that would be just one more unexpected turn on a journey that had been surprising from the very beginning. David glanced at Lyraith, at her luminescent eyes reflecting starlight, at the small smile she showed when she thought no one was watching. And he thought that of all the places his stupid joke could have led, this, standing beside her as equal partners, friends, and possibly something more, was exactly where he was meant to end up, even if neither of them had known it at the time, even if it took a whispered challenge and a leap of faith to get here. The best journeys, after all, begin with unexpected turns, and theirs was just getting started.